Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast is about the journey to a more sustainable future in order for us to be able to do our bit to achieve net zero. I'll be discussing a variety of topics with experts in their field in order to educate and increase our knowledge of clean energy, electric vehicles and the electric vehicle infrastructure. So whether you're an individual wanting to make a difference at home, a small business or a corporate, this podcast is just for you. Okay, so today on the podcast I have got Max Van Der Lande and you are working at Octopus Energy, aren't you? So thank you very much for joining me, Max.
No, it's a pleasure to be on. Thank you very much for inviting me. I feel honoured to be on the podcast.
Oh, stop it. Thank you. No, it's great. And I spotted you on LinkedIn when you were talking about tariffs. So Max, so you're a renewable energy analyst there, aren't you? And what you were talking about was something that I was really quite interested in, which was about smart tariffs. But first, can you tell me, so what does a renewable energy analyst do? And that's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But what do you do at Octopus?
Yeah, so the title's quite funny, really. It's been in the pipeline to change that for a long time, but it's sort of a catch-all, isn't it? I basically analyse in the renewable energy space.
Right.
So I actually work for Octopus Energy Generation, which is our sort of generation arm of the business, and that really focuses on two things: building more renewable energy generation, and that's often sort of taken under the wing of our sort of asset management arm. And then you also have like a really innovative part of the team, which focuses on connecting customers to this generation and making it sort of more accessible and cheaper. So sort of like trying to innovate in that generation sort of area. What do I do day to day? Really varies. So I sort of work across a number of projects. So as you said, smart tariffs, particularly for business, is one of the products I've been working on heavily recently. But I'm also involved in trying to unlock onshore wind in the UK, particularly in England. I'm also involved in sort of trying to lead some sort of thought pieces around sort of grid connections, and just sort of basically unlocking renewables in the UK is probably the one theme I'd say.
Okay. And go on. When you're saying about grid connections, what are you meaning there?
So many people don't know this, but one of the biggest issues right now in deploying generation is trying to get a grid connection. If you've got a solar farm and you want to connect to the grid, you've got to apply to the grid, or a wind turbine, or etc. And one of this sort of, at first 5 years ago, this might have taken a year to get a grid connection, and you might have to pay for a small number of upgrades. The problem we've got right now is that the grid really hasn't been designed for this sort of decentralized connection. It's built around sort of centralized. You have one cold power station, you have one nuclear reactor, and it all feeds in and then feeds down to the houses. But the way we're sort of building renewables now is we're sort of decentralizing it. So lots of small scale generation feeding up and then back down. And so what's happened now is getting a connection can take up to 10 years or more. We're seeing sort of connection deadlines sort of in excess of 2035. Oh my God. And more than just taking a long time, we're also seeing the price of them go up and up. So many new renewable projects are basically unable to sort of proceed simply based on their grid connection, which is not ideal when we're trying to decarbonize the electricity system.
No. So why would you say is it so problematic? You know, is it just because as you know, I've spoken to Graham Cooper, but I suppose I didn't realise about the length of time that these things would take. That's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it varies a lot by where you are in the UK, but it's not. It's a 10-year plus sort of connection time is unfeasible for almost all projects. So that's one of the problems. So why is it so bad? It's there's a few reasons. Firstly, we are transforming the whole sort of infrastructure of the grid, sort of flipping it on its head slightly. So this decentralized approach. I think when the grid, so 5 years ago, as I mentioned, when people were first connecting, there was what we described as headroom, so excess capacity on the grid, essentially. And that headroom has sort of been incrementally taken up by these new projects. And we've sort of reached that tipping point where often when you're connecting a project, you might not just have to upgrade your sort of local network, but it sort of triggers a sort of domino effect of upgrades up the sort of connection voltages and up the scales. So if you're connecting even a relatively small project, you may find yourself lumped with up to millions in sort of connection fees, which again, unfeasible. There's lots of really interesting things that are going on right now to try and solve these problems. To sort of knuckle down one of the problems, okay, is because of the situation, what a lot of people do is just fire out millions of grid connection applications across the UK. So you've got this whole market for applications that have been submitted. And there's a sort of queuing system in this. So if it's a sort of first come, first served basis. So even if your project is more viable and all the rest of it, but there's someone in the queue in front of you who's sort of sitting on their position, unsure if they're going to proceed or not, that can really delay your connection. So one of the things National Grid is doing is basically sort of saying, at the moment, there's a bit of an amnesty. We'll let you drop out of the queue and we won't charge you a fee for doing it. Normally, there's a bit of a penalty if you sort of apply, then drop out.
Oh, God. Okay.
So this is one of the things, there's an amnesty. Another sort of initiative we're sort of trying to work out is, obviously these connections often do need to be upgraded. And so what we can do is we're trying to work out a way of collecting applications together. So say you're a farmer and you want to build some solar, and the next door farm, and the next door farm, and the next door farm, they all want to do it. Why don't you share the cost and distribute this sort of cost? At the moment, we've got what we call a first mover problem. The first one to sort of move pays for the upgrades, and then everyone else in behind them can use and utilize these upgrades. There's a bit of a payback on it right now, but not a very sensible one. So that's one of the approaches. But yeah, there's a number of there's really a whole sort of plethora of issues around sort of grid in the UK and getting grid connections. I think there's also a sort of assumption, as I mentioned, sort of there's a worst case assumption essentially. So when you're applying for your grid, they basically take the assumption you are going to be exporting at your absolute maximum at the worst time possible. Now, National Grid is aware of this, and they're sort of starting to take a slightly more nuanced approach. And this came out in the news, I think, last week, where they, for battery projects, had previously been assuming, worst case scenario, that they would be exporting at maximum capacity in the evening peak. Importing in the evening peak. So putting extra strain on the grid. But which battery operator in their right mind would be charging their battery when the electricity is at its absolute most expensive? This is sort of 5-6 p.m. peak. So they're starting to say, okay, well maybe you won't be importing then. Maybe that isn't really a worst case. So there's a sort of changing how they evaluate projects is improving. So that's the sort of grid connection piece. It's really complicated, but there's a lot of sort of moving parts to it. I think there was actually a press release today by Octopus. Sort of, we're constantly trying to challenge National Grid to go further and further, and sort of try and keep up. The amount of upgrades needed to sort of allow us to decarbonise the electricity network is phenomenal. I think it was up to £35 billion in investment National Grid is now going to have to do, and it's probably going to keep increasing that number. But so that's a kind of connection problem, but there's actually a sort of second tier problem on top of that. So lots of wind projects that people know go up in Scotland. Very windy, slightly more rural, easier to get planning permission. Lots of reasons like that.
And this is onshore rather than offshore, isn't it? Because in Scotland they've got offshore and onshore, haven't they? Am I right?
Exactly. I mean, you're exactly right. So they're leading in the UK in terms of onshore. They've also got lots of offshore as well. But of course, lots of the demand in the UK is where? It's sort of London, really. It's in the southeast. So that's where we've got to get the energy to. And now there's a political problem around that, sort of taking energy from one end of the country and moving it to the other. And I know that sort of the Cornish feel similar on this as well. They don't want to feel like they're being exploited. No one's to exploit anyone. But there is this problem where you've got to move the energy from A to B. Now, it's a long way to go, and there's some pinch points in the way. And what happens is if the grid infrastructure, if the national transmission network can't take that energy from A to B, what happens is the National Grid basically pay two people. Firstly, they pay the wind turbines to stop turning. They say, look, we'll compensate you, stop turning. And then what they'll do then is they'll typically turn on a gas generator, say down south, to then go and burn some gas near the point of demand. So there's sort of three things going on here. Firstly, you're spending loads of money, which is just, I think, for context, it came to almost £1 billion last year was spent doing this.
Oh my God.
This is not a small number, and that
No,
number is
it's not.
only going to increase. So it's only going to increase. So we've got about £1 billion being spent last year on this. Secondly, you're burning a lot of gas. You're basically turning off low carbon, zero carbon at the point of use, and turning on some gas generators. And then the third thing is, all this money costs the consumer. It goes straight to the consumer. So it's a pass-through bill. So it's making everyone's electricity more expensive. So there's a massive piece about grid upgrade requirements. Of course, that's in itself nuanced, because no one wants big pylons going through areas outside natural beauty.
No.
So it's a big problem, and there's undersea cable projects going on, but expensive, timely, etc., etc. But this is sort of where lots of my work comes in. This is why this decentralized approach is far more favourable, because we're sort of doing it half-heartedly. We're sort of seeing a centralisation of generation, but up in Scotland, partly in planning, partly due to sort of environmental factors. But it's not really serving the need of the consumer. So this is where we're sort of trying to flip it on its head and trying to build this local, consumer-connected generation. That's my niche, trying to connect consumers to their generation.
Do you know, it sounds fascinating but frustrating for you, and for us to actually, to hear the fact that what we thought was happening isn't actually happening. Like you say, if it's £1 billion for them to stop one thing and start something else up, that I suppose, thinking about it, I'm just thinking, surely there's an easier way to do this. Come on, we don't want to do that. We don't want gas. We don't want power stations being set going again. We want to actually have renewables working on this. But so I didn't realise that. I suppose I realised obviously in times of stress and need that these things happen, but I didn't realise it was kind of because of the fact that they can't get one, the power from one place to another because of the distance.
Yeah, exactly that. It's just a bottleneck. It's a classic sort of bottleneck in the system. But it's a real problem. And this is what we're trying to solve. One of the many problems we're trying to solve here at Octopus is decentralized energy. And there's sort of two ways I'm personally involved in doing that. There's this sort of max power, which we can come on to in a little bit, and there's this onshore wind. So the onshore wind piece, for the people who don't know this, onshore wind in England has essentially been banned for 2015.
Yes.
And when we say essentially been banned, people are like, well, there's no real ban. There's a memorandum. There's a footnote 54, some buzzword. But there's been a 98% reduction in the build-out of onshore wind in England. So it's essentially a ban. And so there's been a consultation, which we've been feeding into recently, trying to unlock onshore wind development again in England, but doing it the right way. We only want to develop where consumers want it. So a short history lesson, I suppose. We were, up to 2015, there was a sort of national interest in developing onshore wind. The government really wanted to do it, everyone really wanted to do it, and then we sort of got these large organisations building large wind turbines in little rural villages, and the villagers really having no say and saying, sort of, suck it up, it's happening. And then, of course, everyone sort of kicked back and said, no, this is not how it should be done at all.
Yeah.
And the result was, well, the ban. So we're like, this time, let's unlock it, but let's do it right. Let's lead where consumers want it. There's a few really exciting projects which Octopus has sort of led the way with. Our sort of process starts with something called Fan Club. Now, for Fan Club, it's so when we say fan, we mean wind turbine.
I get you.
Yeah, but for those who don't quite follow, so we have something called a fan club, where essentially we right now have 3 fans, turbines, Fan 1, Fan 2, and Fan 3, spread over the north of England and South Wales. And what we did, we said, well, if you live in the area, the postcodes around these, if you live in the postcode areas around these and the wind is blowing, what you can do is have a discount on your energy. So if the wind's blowing a little bit, you get a 10%. If it's blowing a lot, you get 20%. And if it's really blowing, you get 50% off your energy. And so this is doing a few things. Firstly, it's trying to encourage consumers to engage with this local generation and change their habits to respond to these sort of price signals. So it's trying to be responsive to when the energy is being generated. And this is where we're trying to get to with renewable energy generation, flexibility. Secondly, it's making consumers benefit directly from these projects. There's when projects have been developed historically, there have been these sort of community funds that sort of get lost in building a tennis court or a football pitch, but they don't typically get to the consumers themselves, get to the community themselves. Whereas this is saying, if you're with Octopus, you'll directly benefit in your bill each month. And we've seen great consumer engagement with this, really, really fantastic consumer engagement. So there was a massive consumer influx saying, let's build generation where I am. Okay, and then we're like, okay, brilliant, okay, perfect. Got some amazing data on this now, brilliant. What next? Well, to build a wind turbine, we need some land to build a wind turbine on. You can't just sort of magic one out of thin air. And so then we did a sort of something called plots for kilowatts. Okay, we love our catchy names here at Octopus.
You do, don't you? Yeah.
So plots for kilowatts. So what this is landowners. We're essentially asked, do you want to have a wind turbine? Do you want to host a wind turbine on your land for you and your community? And we've had an amazing response on that. We've had, I think, maybe 60,000 acres or more, I can't remember off the top of my head, of land being submitted by farmers or landowners saying, hey, I'd love to have one here. And so now we've got these two brilliant data sources spread over the whole of the UK. And we're like, okay, so we've got good data. What next? If we want to go and build wind turbines, we've got to find a way we can do it. And I know I've talked about this of grid connection issue at length already. So that's a big factor. What else is a big factor? Well, we need wind, obviously.
Funny that. Yeah.
We've got these things. We've got wind, we've got grids, we've got land, and we've got consumer interest. And so, okay, well, we need to bring these things together. So the project I've been sort of involved with called Winder, Wind for Tinder, which is again excellent naming.
Oh my God, love that.
We've mapped all this data along with things like SSI, sites of special scientific interest, along with AONBs, area of outstanding natural beauty, along with nature reserves, along with a whole host of different sort of data layers. And what we're doing now is using this data to start going, okay, so we've got interest, we've got wind, we've got where should we start doing this? We strongly believe this is the way it should be done. It should be consumer led and sort of generation. We aren't prescribing to anyone this is where it's going to be. We're saying, hey, do you want it? And that's the right way of doing it, I think.
I love that. And I talk about this a lot on this podcast. We call it the voice of the customer. Exactly. In continuous improvement, the work that I do, we call it the voice of the customer because the voice of the customer is so important. And if you just stick your fingers in your ears and go, la, 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 I'm not listening, then that's not the way to be, and you're not doing that. You're doing totally the opposite of that. You're actually going out. Still, that story, Wind for Tinder, just still cracked me up. Oh my God.
We call it a matchmaking service. It's a matchmaking service.
It totally is, though. It totally is. I love it. There's just... This is an innovation with the heart, heart in the right place, isn't it, for Octopus? So you're getting ready. What does that mean? What are the next steps then?
The next step is, as I sort of mentioned before, this came out in a press release maybe today or yesterday. There's a consultation for a document called the NPPF, or National Policy Planning Policy Framework. Okay. Catchy title. And then inside this very, very long and boring document is a sort of section on wind turbine development and how it should be done and how planning committees should approach the problem. Yeah. There is in there an example, a footnote called footnote 54, which is the famous one. This is the one that basically brings in the ban. It's also called the single objector footnote, where essentially if one person objects to the plan, that really can derail the whole sort of development process. So it makes, and it really is a single person. We've sort of there's a sort of classic example which we sort of discussed internally, which rumor has it there was one project that was trying to be developed, but one local person took to rejection. they couldn't see the project from their property, and so what they did is they cut down their own hedge such that they could see the project and therefore object to it.
No.
So this is really NIMBYism.
Okay.
Not in my backyard, taken to the ninth degree. And I'm not saying wind turbines should be built everywhere, but there's been a certain issue with this policy. So we've been consulting, and we sort of basically there's that part, and there's a few other parts which we're like, these need to change. These really need updating. And so that's the next step. So get English onshore wind, because Scotland and Wales have their own planning policies.
Right.
Get English onshore wind unlocked. So hopefully we can start bringing generation wind turbines close to demand. Factories, people, businesses, etc.
Yeah. Are you still? I suppose you're, like you say, you're bringing it nearer to the source. You're bringing the source nearer to the requirement, then, aren't you?
Exactly.
So I can see. But have you still got that length of time for National Grid to kind of give you the thumbs up? Here you go. You've still got the 10 years.
You've still got the 10 years, depending on where you're building, depending how big your site is, depending if you're connecting to the National Grid or if you're connecting to a DNO, distribution network operator. But yeah, there's still that barrier, and so we're lined up our ducks, and we're sort of knocking on the door and trying to sort of solve the problems, bring the walls down one at a time. I think I managed to squeeze in 3 or 4 different metaphors there.
Yeah, you did. You didn't put spinning the plates.
Spinning the plates, we'll get the
ducks in a row.
exactly. But yeah, one problem at a time, and we're trying to bring the problems down. But yeah, that's the idea. Bring generation back to the demand.
So let's talk smart tariffs then, because that's how we started talking in the first place, wasn't it? Exactly. And you talked about max power to start off with. Can you just explain a little bit about it?
Yeah, of course. So as I mentioned before, trying to unlock wind is one part, but trying to unlock solar is another part. And there's 2 ways you can approach solar. So there's utility scale, ground mounted, we call it, so building in a field, or there's this rooftop. And so what Max Power is trying to do is trying to expand and unlock rooftop. Now, the sort of step back from that, who has the big roofs? Businesses, typically.
Yes.
Okay, so warehouses, factories, etc., etc., etc. And so businesses account for, I think, about 20% of all emissions in the UK. So quite a big chunk to go and decarbonise. So they're a good target. Now, for those who don't know, when businesses develop solar, they try and do something where they optimise, not maximise, their installations. And what I mean by that is, if you're a sun manufacturer, okay, and you've got one factory here and a warehouse over there, you will sort of optimize for each individual site. So you'll take your factory and you'll say, well, my factory uses 10 gigawatt hours a year, whatever, made up number. And I will basically adjust the size of my solar installation to meet that demand. There's good economics generally for most businesses to go and do this right now. But they won't maximize. So often what this means is they're only installing solar on a third of their roof space. And sort of from an outsider, you're there like, oh, hang on a second, you've got a brilliant roof here. You're already up there with all the ladders. You're installing the electrical equipment. Put a few more solar panels on. Why not? Yeah. So this is where we sort of trying to flip the thinking from optimize to maximize. And so there's another sort of problem in this. So say this factory, you can put the solar panels on. But say your warehouse has got a really weak roof and it can't take the weight of solar panels. So right now they would just leave that roof empty as they would, and they wouldn't put any more on their factory to meet the demand of the warehouse. So they're 2 completely separate problems. So what Max Power does, it's trying to bring them together, okay? And so how does it do this? Firstly, it's about a simplification. If you're a business and you have 50 different sites in your portfolio, 50 different sort of locations in your portfolio, you would get for each one of them a range of different numbers representing your bill. This could be incredibly complex. This could be up to 7, 8 different numbers representing your bill. So that could be your import price. They might sort of split out what we call your non-commodity prices. You'll have things like standing charge, capacity charge, and then a whole range of other bits thrown on the top. And then if you've got any generation, you'll have an export number as well. So we're talking about 5, 6, 7 numbers per building. And if you've got a site, sort of portfolio of 50 buildings, you're dealing with 250, 300, 400 numbers just representing your charges and how you play out. So it makes the problem incredibly complicated for business.
Yeah.
So what Max Power does is says firstly, okay, well, this is silly. What we're going to do is we're going to take your whole portfolio and we're going to price them all together. Okay, so by the end of it, you'll have import, an export, a standing, and a capacity. 4 numbers. I think most businesses can deal with these 4 numbers. It's a real simplification. And we're like, okay, that's better, that's easier. Okay, especially for non-technical businesses, and that's much easier. Okay, the next part is, well, by doing these businesses together, something really fun happens. Here's the fun part. So when you have a factory and it has demand, it requires energy, and you sign up to Octopus Energy or any other supplier, what we'll do is we'll go away and we'll buy all your energy in advance. This is called hedging. So you say, in the next year, I'm going to need this energy. And we'll go to the market and we will go and buy you that energy and we'll deliver that then. So the way energy is broken up is it's in a half-an-hour blocks. So we'll buy energy in each one of those half-an-hour blocks to meet your demand. In the same portfolio, you might also be exporting. So you might have some solar somewhere. And what we'll do then is we'll go to market and we will sell all the energy we anticipate you producing ahead of time. Okay, so the reason this is silly is because if you are simultaneously exporting and you're simultaneously importing, what you're doing, your net position is far smaller. So there's a big crossover there in the middle. And so most of the time you can do a lot of cancelling out, essentially. So Octopus doesn't need to go and sell all your energy. It only needs to go sell the energy you won't meet with your own export, with your own generation.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So it can really reduce the bill on us and reduce the bill on you. So how do I, that's sort of the problem. And then I add another layer of complication onto this. A technical term, which we all hate, is something called sleeving. Okay, sleeving.
Okay.
And I have no idea where the term came from, sleeving. But we can call it time matching instead. And you'll see what I mean. So there's a financial arrangement which sort of existed in the markets for a while called sleeving. And what it says is, okay, let me step back actually. Here's the logic. If you are a homeowner and you put solar panels on your roof, you will use the energy from your solar panels before you start buying energy from the grid.
Yes.
Okay, makes sense, simple. Okay,
and
now
that's what we're intending to do in the next few months.
Oh, very exciting. Yeah. Very exciting. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Very simple.
With a battery.
With a battery. And now let's say, okay, hypothetically, you don't have space on your roof, so you put them in the field next to your house or near to your house. You can do something called private wire, which is exactly what it sounds like. You're basically taking an extension cable out and plugging yourself in, and then you use the energy from your solar panels before you import from your grid. Okay, now let's say these solar panels are too far away for an extension cable. What do you do? Well, one thing Octopus can do, and some other smart people as well, is we can say this. We will buy the energy from your solar panels, and if you are importing at your house at the same time, we will sell you that energy you produce back to you. So that's what sleeving is. It's basically moving the energy from A to B. And what we can do is we can sort of we sort of pass through some costs. So this is another layer of complication. It's a weird product. So hopefully everyone's following me.
I'm getting it.
But yeah, so so what we do with sleeving, we won't be charging you what's called a wholesale cost. The actual energy itself, you will be providing yourself.
Of course, yes.
What we will have to do is have to pass through the costs. So when energy goes through the grid, there are a number of different costs associated that we get levied with from the transmission network, the distribution networks. So these sort of costs we pass through to the consumer, essentially. But the wholesale cost, which is the largest chunk, gets avoided. So, all right, there's a bit of background there. Let's summarize that up. So sleeving, moving energy from A to B, portfolio pricing, all as one, and this hedging situation, simplified. Max Power brings that all together under one roof, and we say, okay, bring us your 50 businesses, we will forecast your demand, your generation, and therefore will forecast your net position, your export demand difference. And we will give you 5 simple numbers: your import, your export, your standing charge, your capacity charge, and a sleeved rate. So a cost for moving energy from A to B.
Yeah.
Some numbers out the air. The sleeved rate is about a third of the price of importing energy off the grid at the moment. About a third of the price.
Okay.
So about 10p per kilowatt hour. This changes portfolio to portfolio. This changes site to site. But 10p. So very, very low rate. So this is doing 3 things. It's making businesses save some money, which is good. Okay. It's also making the economics of solar work better. So what I mean by that is, for a business, if their solar panels are exporting, they're earning some money, a little bit of money.
Yeah.
But if their solar panels are sleeving, they're saving even more money.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's making the economics, making the finances of putting solar on better. And then thirdly, it's now coming back to this maximize, not optimize problem. It's saying, well, let's not just put solar panels on half the roof with that factory warehouse example. Let's fill the roof on the factory so the warehouse can make use of the energy as well. So that's what's going on here. We're doing that on a portfolio level and hopefully unlocking and encouraging renewable generation for businesses. That's the idea.
Oh, these clever things. Goodness me. And that's what. So you're involved in that and the wind farm projects as well, aren't you?
Yeah. So I sort of wear a few different hats, but yeah, that's this project right now is sort of getting off the ground. We've sort of starting our pilot on it. Well, we've started the pilot. And so hopefully we'll get some sort of early results quite quickly. But yeah, I sort of wear a few different hats. That's the fun of Octopus. We do lots of things, and it gives you a lot of opportunity.
We were talking very briefly, weren't we, before we started recording, about kind of the different tariffs as a homeowner, and specifically somebody like us we're looking at solar and battery, and we're also looking at an EV. So you were talking about a tariff for EV drivers, weren't you?
Yeah. So Octopus offers a whole range of really amazing and innovative products, and so for the best product for you, I recommend going to the website and doing some research. But a really cool product which we have launched fairly recently is something called Intelligent Octopus. And now what this is it's well, firstly very smart and very complicated, so I'm not going to do it justice. Secondly, what it does is for EV drivers, and it's controlling when we charge your car. So there's a lot of parameters in that. But essentially, you tell us how much charge you need and when for. So you might say, well, for 7 a.m., I want 60% of my battery to be charged because that does my commute and I don't want to overcharge because it's not good for the battery. Yeah. Okay, so 60%. What we then do is we collect all your data. We collect all the data on lots of different drivers. We collate, thousands of drivers, and we can sort of group them together in a way that means we can sort of do group action. So there's a funny term here called VPP, which is virtual power plant. And what this means is we can just change how much demand you have as a group. And this is a really great service for DNOs, distribution network operators, and there's also the national grid, hopefully down the line. And it can basically relieve constraints. If we get told, oh no, okay, so in the southeast we've got really big constraints, can you guys chill out on the charging? What we'll do is we'll just ease up on the vehicles that we can. So say you have to charge your car, we won't be pausing that. But say your car's at 55%, we've got to get it to 60 by the morning. We'll slow down the charging or stop the charging, and then we'll resume it when it's suitable. And so what this does is it generates it's a very, very early market, this very nascent, very, very sort of immature market. But what it does is it means we can get some revenues in and we can pass these through to the consumers. So not only are you charging at night when it's cheap, but you're also sort of doing this sort of group behavior where we can help the grid and help the operators manage this demand. So it's really exciting. And so it's a collaborative project from multiple teams, but sort of lots of the brains sit with a part of the business called Crack and Flex. which are sort of brains of the business. They're the really smart guys, the people who do
Kraken with a K. Is that Kraken with a K? Yeah. I've seen Kraken. Yeah.
They do lots of smart stuff about controlling batteries on a sort of grid scale, and doing lots of stuff like that. And they're applying this sort of really smart utility scale thinking down to the consumers now. And so the consumers are now acting as these big businesses and benefiting from it. That's where we're going. That's the direction of the market. Every consumer should feel empowered and benefit directly.
Absolutely. What a brilliant idea. Absolutely. And what about, because we also talked about, so you've also got another tariff, which is also, you said it was a tri-band tariff. Was that right?
So we've got a really new tariff. This one's targeted at, so you mentioned already that you've got solar panels and you're getting solar panels and a battery. So we've just launched, and again, I'm not involved in this project, but it seems like a really exciting one. Something called Octopus Flux, Flux, Octopus Flux. So this product is specifically designed for people with batteries and solar, and it basically unlocks cheap energy for them. In sort of a repeatable, reliable way. And the way it does this is through something called tri-band. Three, band, I suppose. Three prices is what it's about. And the way that works is in the evening peak, when everyone's switching on their kettles, coming home, cooking their dinner, electricity prices are high, and we have to reflect that. The price in this tri-band is high then. But then you get down to the evening, and the prices drop down to a sort of real low bottom in the middle of the night. Super cheap. This is when you should be charging your battery, essentially. This is when you sort of import from the grid, charge your battery, if your solar panels haven't already done it.
Yes.
And then we sort of have that sort of normal, middle of the day sort of behavior, where it's sort of in the middle, really good price. So you can sort of charge your batteries with your solar panels, or you can export to the grid. So that's our Octopus Flux sort of offering as well. That's
really good. You've given me loads of things to think of as well, and I think probably everybody who's listening, this, actually this has kind of given a really good overview of what you're trying to do at Octopus, and compared to, I don't know many other energy companies. I did work for one, but they're on the telecom side some time ago, but that's really interesting to kind of to understand. So final question. Obviously I saw you on LinkedIn. Is LinkedIn a good place for people to kind of spot you if they want to kind of connect with you?
Absolutely, LinkedIn's a really great way. Yeah, LinkedIn's perfect. I always go through my messages and try and respond as timely as possible. But yeah, LinkedIn's a great way.
Brilliant. And what about if people are actually looking? Where's the best place to look on the Octopus website for kind of information about tariffs?
So if you just Google Octopus tariffs, that's a really good way. If you're looking for the most innovative things out there, we have, of course, a press release section of our website as well. So sort of flick through there, see what's going on. But no, we've got a really informed website. And the way we sort of structure it is there's sort of a central hub where you can go to the tariffs, and then that'll link you through to a tariff-specific webpage. And then if you sort of click through again, there's usually a blog. So this, for example, this applies to Max Power. There's a blog which sort of goes into the raw detail, so you can really understand what you're sort of signing up to and how it works.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh, do you know what? It's been really interesting talking to you, and you've made a lot of things that I didn't have a clue about really interesting, and kind of, it's just, you've kind of broken it down into chunks, which is great. So listen, on that point, I'm going to say thank you ever so much for your time, Max. It's been brilliant. I'm sure there'll be times that we're going to bump into each other in future, and I'd love to grab you and get you back on again. But for today, I will say thank you ever so much, and I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else. See you later. Bye. You've been watching Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell icon, and you'll receive all of our weekly videos. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.